I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, in Alameda, California. Kind of a somber one today. The passing of the late, great Muhammad Ali. And not much to be said that hasn't been said, but we all have different memories, and I'm bringing in my godfather, Tony De Angelo from Connecticut. How are you, Tony?
Well, like you, Zig, as we spoke, I am well, but saddened by the events of the day.
Yeah. It supersedes anything I can think of, any athlete that I can think of that supersedes his sport, his or her sport, to carry over into Americana. And I didn't say that very well, but I think I got my point across. Muhammad Ali was more than just a boxer. He represented a change in America. He represented everything that took place in the 60s, and that's why it was so sad for me. These were the times I grew up in, and so I want you to elaborate on your feelings on Muhammad and what I'm talking about, if you would.
Oh, I'm believe me, I'm honored, and I'm more than happy to, and I think back, being a kid growing up in the greater New York area, and we've spoken about this before. Howard Cosell, who was on the ABC Wide World of Sports, was also doing the sports news at night on the 6 o'clock news. So pretty much if you were a kid in New York or a sports fan, you were getting 6 or 7 days of Howard. Howard was also
This is Howard Cosell speaking
exactly.
of sports.
And Howard would do the sports on WABC, and he would alternate some nights with Tom Harmon, whom I think really is, for all the things that Tom Harmon was as an athlete, he really was a terrific broadcaster, or so I thought. But in any event, I started to watch boxing back in the days of Floyd Patterson, and then started to come the big ugly bear, Sonny Liston. And this is a man that, if you looked at him and you weren't scared, something was wrong with you. And this is a man that was so scary that then President John F. Kennedy called Floyd Patterson to the White House prior to their first championship fight and said, look, you've got to beat this guy because we don't want to fuck his champion. For all the kids in America, you got to do this, Floyd. And, Floyd kind of walked out of there thinking, gee, Mr. President, no pressure. And, poor Floyd got killed twice. And so Sonny was just, huge and foreboding. And every once in a while, if you were watching the Wide World of Sports, you'd hear about this kid, Cassius Clay, who won the Olympic gold in Rome, and he was winning all his fights, and he'd come out with a little poem, and he'd have a prediction written down, and but everybody he fought was really kind of, so-so. Fought Archie Moore as an old man, I'll take Moore and 4 to the floor, and sure enough he did. Probably at that point either you or I could have done that. So the thought was...
You perhaps.
And believe me, don't take away from Archie. He was a wonderful champion and a wonderful guy in many respects. But, and then it's like he's going to fight Sonny Liston. And I thought, well, I'm an 8-year-old kid in Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm thinking this is going to be probably one of the most brutal beatings ever in history. And I'm listening in the radio in my parents' bedroom, and Robert Lipside of the Times, whom you interviewed and whom I've interviewed, just a terrific guy. From what he told us, was sent down to Miami by the Times to pretty much report on the savage beating of Cassius Clay. And they told him, you're going to get a car, Robert. You're going to sit outside the arena, and when the ambulance goes to the hospital with Clay in it, you are to follow the ambulance. And that's pretty much what everybody thought. But
right.
That night, he shocked the world. He just danced rings around Sonny Liston.
He described, Clay at that time described it as he was scared, and he was channeling the energy or putting together the energy to just convince himself with all of the bravado that he was providing that he was indeed scared. But I see film footage, and have been watching a lot of it on YouTube in the past 24 hours, and he was incredibly fast. I mean, incredibly quick. He made such short order of what was his name? Cleveland
Williams.
Cleveland Williams. That I was amazed. Cleveland Williams was a pretty good contender coming up, and I saw some footage in the last few hours of him making him look like a tomato can. Yeah. He was a marvelous athlete, marvelously quick, and a marvelous mind. Those little poems and those things, they were spontaneous. He was the first rapper, if you stop to think of it. And the footwork. He was fast with his hands and fast with his feet. That was a great combination. And,
well, I do know that when he made his comeback in 1971, he's in Madison Square Garden, and he divided his training, I believe, between Miami and New York, and they brought him up to New York at the end. There's a very good movie. It was an independent film, was made in 1971, called Ali the Fighter, and it's the whole chronicle of that first Ali Frazier fight. And it's a low-budget movie, but everything was put together, and you look at it, Zig, and it was a marvelous piece of work, followed by just the 15 rounds of the Ali Frazier fight, with no announcing, with no voiceovers, with no anything. But what you do see is you see him training in Miami, and he's driving around in the little 1905 Oldsmobile, and he's entertaining everybody in the Fifth Street gym, that was run by the Dundee brothers. But at one point he goes over to New York, and he starts to train. Now, from what I understand, he's working out in the basement of the Garden. The New York Knicks were shooting baskets and going up and down, and he came out. Of course, everybody gathered around him, and he was goofing around with the players, and he ran a couple of basketball sets up and down. They said he was just playing against pro basketball players. He's sinking baskets left and right. He was just that good of an athlete.
Yeah, I can believe that. His discipline was incredible. To come back after society basically took 4.5 years out of this man's life, his earning ability, his athletic ability, but more importantly, his mind. And they could have broken him right there. And for him to come back was, I think that really changed the course of the United States. We're getting out of Vietnam at the time. Things were changing, and he was proven to be right. No Vietnamese ever called him nigger. It was just
he had no quarrel with him.
Those were his words, not my words. No Vietnamese don't like me. I don't like them. I like them. That kind of thing. I don't have any grudge against them. And he was so simplistic, yet he said it all at a time when only the protesters were saying things like that, and they weren't going over very well with the mainstream media at the beginning, because you got to remember, this is a country that is built on war. War is our middle name. We got one going on all the time.
And the amazing
thing, it ain't working, and that was the first protesters that stood up and said, hey, it ain't working, change things, were really lambasted, and he was the first conscientious objector. Oh, he's a chicken, that kind of thing. No, man, that's not the way it is. It didn't prove to be that way, and he was the first to identify it. So, and most times, what athletes have to say really isn't important. There are very few of them that are worth interviewing. We both know that. Very few, and he was foremost. So, we'll always miss him as a country.
Well, and the amazing thing, and there's so many amazing things with Muhammad Ali, was we'll never know. I mean, those 3.5 to 4 years when he didn't fight, what he would have done. He was so convicted to his belief, and this is the thing that, today's society can't even begin to fathom. At one point, I understand, Howard Cosell had mentioned this in his book, Jimmy Brown and Bill Russell and several other black athletes visited Ali and said, look, don't go to jail. You could make a ton of money here. You could do a lot of good for America. He wasn't going to get into any combat. What they wanted him to do was go into training, then go abroad and tour the bases and do exhibitions, and then come back into the United States in uniform, continuing to be in service in a big money fight against Floyd Patterson. He said, no, it is wrong for me to do this. I will not do it. And I could remember now, I was in 6th grade in 1967, and it was April of 1967, and my 6th grade teacher, Paul Romanello, I don't know if he's still with us, God bless his soul, either way, if he is or he isn't, told us, you have to go home. You have to watch what's going to happen. This is going to be historic because this man is going to defy induction into the United States Army and will give up his career and will probably get arrested. So I go home, good, dutiful little kid that I was. Actually, I was a good, dutiful, fat little kid, but that's besides the point, or maybe it's part of the point. And you see Howard in his white trench coat and his little fedora hat with the microphone in front of Muhammad in Louisville, Kentucky, saying, Muhammad Ali, are you going to take the step? I don't do a very good Cosell. Hello, Cosell, why don't you go take the step? I did, Muhammad, in 1942. And taking the step was symbolic of induction, and Ali refused to do it. And at that point, literally all hell broke loose. And you're absolutely right. It was sports and politics and entertainment and culture all wrapping around this one man.
Right. And he was worshipped by every athlete. I was looking back at a quote from a book that by a fellow that I interviewed the other day. Danny Peary wrote a book on.
I love Danny. He's a great author.
Oh, he's terrific. And he sent me a copy of his book. It's 3,000 quotes about or from Jackie Robinson, and it's indexed. And there's a quote on page 340 by Jackie about Muhammad Ali, and it really says a lot. Everything says a lot about Jackie in my life. This guy was unbelievably tremendous. And he was all for Muhammad Ali being able to be treated. If he wants to be a Muslim, let him be a Muslim. If he wants to be a Protestant, a Catholic, we should not judge what anybody wants to be. And very few people in those days were taking up for Muhammad. I want you to know that Jackie was. Jackie wasn't going to him to say make money. Jackie was... not taking anything away from Jimmy Brown or Jim Brown or whoever it was that went to Jackie, that went to Muhammad with good intentions. They weren't really his beliefs, and standing up for his beliefs is what he was about, and that's why the country's crushed today. If you're on Facebook, that's the only thing people are talking about is his passing, and it's terrible.
the man had this, and this is the thing. Some of our mutual friends on Facebook today were blessed and fortunate to be near him or with him and show pictures with him. I never got that close to him. I can tell you that in 1974, I used to make a habit of taking out my pen and notebook paper and writing for tickets to shows in New York just to be a member of the audience. It was really neat. You know, it was a reasonably short train ride, and you can go and you could watch a show. Whoever the guest is there, you know, it was a fun thing to do for little to no money. And I've always been a big fan of Dick Cavett. I still am to this day. And I wrote for tickets to the Dick Cavett show. You know, those days we did not have electronic mail. And 2 tickets came, and I took a friend, and we went down to New York. So, and the whole thing is we're standing outside, and we're saying to others, who are the guests? And everybody's like, we really don't know. They don't tell you who the guests are. So a limousine pulls in front of the theater, and out of this limousine, I'm probably maybe 90 feet away, jumps Ali, and he's dressed beautifully. He's in a suit. He's impeccably tailored. He waves to the crowd. Zig, I've never seen anything like it. Everybody is yelling and screaming and crying. He just had that charisma to just drive people to their knees. It was amazing to me. And, you know, there was another time, 13 years after that, I was walking up Park Avenue to go to work, you know, from the train. And I look across Park Avenue. Of course, in New York, there's always some kind of scrum going on somewhere. There's a big scrum, and I'm saying, well, that's a little bigger scrum than typically what you might see in the morning. So I kind of figured, okay, I'm
interesting way of describing humanity there in New York.
Exactly.
One big scrum. That's all it is.
Well, you know, and then you think of that
I grew up there
episode
too,
of The
and I'm
Odd
going
Couple.
back for a visit someday soon. Very much.
You think of that episode of The Odd Couple where Jack Sue's playing the championship wrestler, and he turns to Felix Unger and he says, "What's the big deal about wrestling? I come to New York, I walk in Central Park, everybody wrestles." You know, it's so true. So I walked into work, and my office was in the back. I had a shared office. I put my coat on the hook, and I put my bag down. I walked out to go to the washroom, and our receptionist, whom I did not see on the way in, which was highly unusual because she was always so prompt, and a very, very cool young lady, very, very cool young black lady who was like unruffled, was sitting at her desk crying and screaming. And I thought, oh, my Lord, something happened to her. So I'm like, Val, her name is Valerie, are you okay? And she says, yes, I'm fine. Did you see it? I said, no, see what? Muhammad Ali, he was across the street. He's beautiful. I love him. And she's crying and she's hyperventilating. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry I missed him, but this is the power this man had. He was just instant charisma.
Yeah, nice. What do you remember most about him over the years?
What do I remember most about him? I mean, his skill.
Okay.
His he would always build up the gate, you know, and like talk things up to make it look like he really hated Floyd Patterson. He didn't. He really hated Joe Frazier. I don't know if they really loved each other or hated each other, but I'm sure he didn't hate him as much as he said he did. And then at the end, what I really remember about him was he was really contrite in victory or defeat, and he was very respectful to the people around him, unfortunately to his detriment in many instances, because really, when you look at it, Angelo Dundee and Don King and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and Herbert, a.k.a. Fat Herbie Muhammad, did this man no favors. You know, they kept him there fighting far beyond the point when he really should have. Freddie Pacheco, you know, the fight
that
doctor
Holmes.
went to him.
I think fighting Holmes made me cry. I remember Wow,
exactly.
that's like Willie Mays falling down as a Met in 1973 in the outfield. Although Mays gave him some moments, and they did win.
Oh, I watched him. Yeah, he sure did.
Aside that, he was a mere shadow of his former self. And I'm a mere shadow of my former shadow, so what can I say?
But those guys kept him around for too long, and they were making money. And Herbie made sure that if there was a purse, Herbie was going to get his hands on it. And that was really the sad thing. And no one really looked out for this man. What should have happened, the last Frazier fight, that should have been, okay, it's all over. It's nice career, Muhammad. It's time to quit. And I think
can you talk more about the Ali Cosell relationship and how they basically contributed to giving each other a tremendous hit, if you will, in their careers?
They really were. You talk about Laurel and Hardy, you talk about Abbott and Costello, you talk about Martin and Lewis. They really were probably one of the best comedy teams ever in the history of entertainment.
And it was all spontaneous. They had no lines. They had no idea of what they were going to say. They would react to each other. You mentioned Ali talking to Cosell and saying, "Where you stand up, blah, blah, blah." He says, "Well, you stand up." And Cosell come back, "I did, 1942. It was a different time. You were fighting Nazis. You weren't fighting for oil or Catholicism, which I think basically is why Vietnam was escalated. But that's another thing. It was their oil and the rights of missionary. You want them to go over there and make as many people Catholic as you possibly can, because you bring them all to heaven, and that's really sweet and nice. Right. What were you saying?
Well, as far as the, Cosell and Ali, they would have some heated exchanges, and yet you'd see Howard start cracking up at the end, or Ali would smile. It was like I was watching the one today where he's going to fight Ernie Terrell, and he's in a bad mood, and Cosell's interviewing him. He says, you know, Muhammad, you're being very truculent. He looked at him, truculent? I don't know what that means, but if it means good, that's what I am.
I remember him going over some guy in the middle on a talk show to try to pull Howard's wig off his head. That made me laugh, and Howard's covering up, and it also reminds me of Billy Crystal doing imitations of them. Billy Crystal was a delight. Any memories of him?
Billy Crystal, it's I remember something way back I had seen where he had said
I remember he had a whole bit where he was doing both sides of a conversation between
huge Yankee fan, huge Mantle fan.
Yeah. Big Mantle fan. Also a master imitator, and really did justice to both of them.
He really, from what I understand, was one of the original designated cast members of Saturday Night Live. And the story that I heard is about 11:25 on the debut show, and his manager, and I believe it was Lorne Michaels of the producer of Saturday Night Live, were fighting over what Billy was going to get for being on Saturday Night Live. And they just could not come to terms 5 minutes before airtime. So finally, Lorne Michaels says to Billy, you leave. You go home to Long Island. You are not going to be on the show. And Billy's like, but this is my big break. What are you doing to me? Just get out of there. You are not going to work for what this man is paying you. And he tells the story of walking to Penn Station and going to the train, the Long Island Railroad train, with tears streaming down his made-up face. And one of the things his manager said is, you will be much better and you will be much farther along than all these people by never having done this. You will thank me in years to come. And, boy, wasn't that the truth.
Yes. But, people make it. It took him a long time to make it after that. It was a big grind to make it. And you give up a lot by doing it your way. You win a lot, but you give up a lot by doing it your way. Sometimes in life, it's easier to take the mainstream. Somebody's looking back. Because nobody did make it really big on that first Saturday Night Live show either. He was destined for it. Soap was terrific. Soap was a breakthrough in comedy, and it enabled him not only to make it for himself, but to play a gay character, a positive gay character. Big step for Americana.
For certain.
Yeah, he was.
No, please.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying we're as usual when we talk, we go off into interesting things that aren't necessarily sports. But if you want to do bring it all together, you mentioned Billy Crystal was an incredible Yankee fan, and he produced a movie in 1961 about the
Mantle and Maris. Yeah, I love that.
Maris. I think it was called 61, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Nobody ever produced a movie about the Mets and called it 69, but that's another story. 61 was a marvelously realistic baseball movie. They brought actors in that you could not tell them apart from Mantle and Maris, and they had marvelous settings. They had an apartment setting in Queens that was very, very realistic. Having grown up in Queens, I know this. And Mantle, Maris, and Serve shared an apartment in Queens, and they just brought their lives together a little bit, and it was a great movie.
Well, and there's the one scene in that movie where the actors playing Mantle, Maris, and Serve are watching the Andy Griffith Show, and Maris and Serve are like, they can't wait. They think it's like the greatest thing as the theme is playing. And Mickey is looking at the same, with this look of, what the heck is this?
Yeah, they were just kids when you think about it. Especially Maris was such a shy. Mantle had been in New York for a lot of years by then. He came to New York a country bumpkin, but he was a city slicker thanks to Whitey Ford and Billy Martin before it was over.
Yes.
But Maris could never adjust to life in the big city, and that was a big thing for him. He was separated from his wife, who stayed back in Missouri.
And what was sad is you didn't really know how good, if not great, a player Maris was until he left the Yankees to go to the Cardinals. And, he was a marvelous player and a great arm, a terrific base runner, excellent sense of the game. You never really knew that in New York. You saw it.
Well, he was MVP the year before he went for the record. And that's one thing. And he really didn't get a chance to be as good as he could have been in St. Louis because he played with a hurt wrist. And I think he was hurt while he was still a Yankee, and they
and they wouldn't let him get an operation.
On it. It was like, they didn't. It was never fully diagnosed or this, that, and the other thing.
And just became a very rich man because one of the deals that he wanted to quit baseball. I believe it was either before he got there or in his final year, and he said to Gussie Busch, I'll play, but for me to play, you've got to give me a beer distributorship. And Gussie Busch did. He gave him the one at Disney World. So, you know.
Is that the one he got? Oh, okay.
That was the one he got. You could draw your own conclusions from there. But, yeah, don't cry for the Maris family. But you know, he was you never really knew the type of player he was until he left New York.
Yeah. Well, he was pretty good in New York. He was that was a great team, that 1961 Yankee team, and there were a lot of them. You can take any of the teams in the 49 to 53 when they won 5 championships in a row. You can take the 56 or the 58 Yankees. That 61 team with Boyer playing third, and Kubek and Richardson, and 3 catchers that each hit over 20 home runs, and the aforementioned Maris and Mantle. Damn good. Whitey Ford, Bob Turley. And Turley was hurt. He didn't pitch a lot, but Bill Stafford, and it was just a very, very good ball club, Ralph Terry. What do you remember most about your baseball childhood fandom? What was your first game?
Well, the first game, I went to a game in 1961 with my mother and my brother and sat in the very hot bleachers of Yankee Stadium, and all I remembered was it was hot, it was noisy, it was crowded, and I wanted to go home. And believe it or not, the late Earl Averill hit a home run that day, and I'd interviewed Mr. Averill, and we had talked about that. I said, I saw one of your home runs, but I barely remember it, and he would laugh. And he was a treasure. He had some great stories to tell about.
He was with the Angels, am I correct, in 61?
He sure was, and was talking about Cal McLish, or as Lindsey Nelson would say on the Met broadcast, would say his full name, Calvin Coolidge Julius Caesar William Francis Tuskahoma McLish. And Earl Averill was saying he was quite a poet. I would think he'd have to be with a name like that. But I'm digressing. The game that I remember, 1962, went to the Polo Grounds and saw the Mets play the Cincinnati Reds, and I have very vivid recollections of that game. And it was the whole thing of the Mets and the whole newness of the team is back in the National League, and walked down to the front and petted Homer the dog, and it was just a marvelous thing. And we all thought, at least by then, I had no idea of Casey Stengel's great managerial career with the Yankees. I just thought he was this old clown that was called upon to manage this team, and it was really, really neat. And
were your family Dodger fans or Giant fans? I know you were too young to remember.
I would say probably more Dodger fans. Yeah, and I would say that would be more the case. Okay.
And favorite player on that Met team, that 62 Met team?
The early Met team?
Yeah.
I liked, there's so many. I liked Al Jackson. Because
Little Alvin Jackson.
Little Al, he was a great pitcher. And I mean, could have been much better if he had a club behind him. And he was always very dignified and respectable and would pitch his guts out, which you really don't see.
And he was a little guy, and you wanted the little guy. He reminded me of Bobby Shantz a little bit.
Yeah.
Not in color, of course, but in delivery and what have you. And also, Bob Murphy would say every time he came in, or every time he pitched, he'd say, Little Alvin Jackson, born in Waco, Texas, on Christmas Day. He was the 9th kid or something like that. So I have good memories of those early years, too. You're a pleasure. I enjoy your company on and off the air, Tony D.
Well, it's in the words of Ralph Cramden, I'm showing you the glorious results of a misspent youth.
Okay. We both have those. I can remember stuff, and I can't remember where I left my car keys. But I can't, or for that matter, where I left my car. But I can remember statistics or bubblegum cards from 1951. So go figure. We're all blessed in different ways.
Yeah, and getting back to Ali, where we started this. I mean, what a career, and I just wish he got out earlier, and they just left him to be pounded down towards the end. And that whole thing with Larry Holmes in 1980 should not have happened. And Angelo Dundee, whom you have to respect him for the fact that he was a great boxing trainer, but Angie wasn't exactly on the up and up all the time, and like the whole thing, and where he's fighting Liston for the first time, and the liniment which Ali said that Liston had on his gloves, and Angie kind of took that into his head and said, this isn't a bad thing to do. Maybe I'll save it for when I need it. When he fought Ernie Terrell was complaining about that. So really, Angie kind of picked that up as he went along. But the whole rope-a-dope thing, Angie would go in and test the ropes and make sure there was enough free play for Muhammad to come back. So this way, anybody trying to hit him off the ropes really couldn't get a great advantage at him. So,
right.
And then Angie at the end was like, well, this guy's going to be fine, fighting at 38 against Larry Holmes. And I'm like, ugh, And
I remember his daughter, too, was a boxer. And,
yes.
Of some repute, if I'm not mistaken.
Belinda, yes. Yeah.
I don't know how far she came up in the female boxing rankings, or if there really is any female champion. I'm sure there is. But we'll have to save that for another show. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Zig. Always a pleasure.
It always really is, and I wish it could be under better circumstances, and the next one, I promise you, will be.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
How's Bob doing? Would you send his regard? He's off Facebook. Bob Lazari, everybody, Tony's co-host.
He was here. He was here last Saturday, and he was here last Monday. WABC was having its annual Rewound segment on Rewound Radio, which is all the old WABC air checks, or as many have been survived and been collected. And they do a marvelous job of putting them together with the original commercials in the sports. One of the clips had a sports report of Howard Cosell was talking about the New York Giants had signed, this was in 1963, their first draft pick, a gentleman by the name of Joe Don Looney, who was in trouble when Oklahoma. Yeah. And
went on to the Colts, as a matter of fact, later on. And
he didn't like to practice because he said if practice makes perfect, and if nobody could be perfect, why practice?
Big article in Sport Magazine back then about Joe Don Looney and his dad. His dad had quite a strange upbringing, if I remember correctly. And again, I'm still looking for the call. So we'll catch you next week, everybody. I just want everybody out there to remember to keep on keeping on. Have a great one.
For sure.
Bye-bye.
Good night, Dick.
Thanks again,
Thank
man.
you.